Hello, everyone. This is Belinda Carr, and you're listening to my podcast on building science, products, and technology. As we know, the construction industry is ripe for automation and disruption. It has been reliant on manual labor and outdated tech for far too long, which has led to lagging productivity. Every week, I chat with a company that is exploring ways to tackle these issues. Today, I'm speaking with David Renggli, Director of Market Strategy at Renggli International in Switzerland. Thanks for joining us, David.
Linda, pleasure to be here. Hi, welcome everyone.
So your family's company, Renggli International, is a specialist in timber construction. You have one of the largest and most modern timber production facilities in Europe. And I was fortunate enough to visit it just a couple of weeks ago. So thank you, first of all, for hosting us and everyone else in the Sega group. That was truly a mind-blowing experience. Your factory is so impressive.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to have you there.
Yeah, and it's almost as large as a soccer field. Is that right?
That's correct. I've actually never made the comparison, but yeah, I think so. We're having around about 80 to 100,000 square feet in Switzerland. Yeah.
And so let's explain a little bit more about the company itself before diving into the history of the company. So y'all have figured out this magic formula to panelize construction, and y'all make all these prefabricated panels in your factory through this incredible almost assembly line production, like where y'all actually cut the timber members with a machine and then the drywall, even the drywall is cut with the CNC router. And then it moves on to the next stage with the assembly of the walls and then the floors, and all of it is packaged very tightly and very precisely and shipped off to job sites where it's assembled on the job site. So that in a nutshell is what your company has managed to achieve. Right.
That is, and I think the process goes a little bit further. I mean, we start obviously way earlier in the engineering, in the architecture department. And once we were done with production, goes on to assembly, and finally handing over the building to the client, and dealing with warranty issues and everything that the client or that is necessary in Switzerland also a few years after the after-sales process.
Yeah, I kind of simplified the whole process in my brief explanation. It's much more complicated than that. But let's start off with the history of your company. Y'all are almost 100 years old. The company was started by your great-great-grandfather in 1923, is that right?
That's correct.
So is that you've probably been asked this 100 times over, but so is this company that you have built today, is that what your great-grandfather envisioned, or how did he start off with the company, and when did you all pivot to this incredibly modern facility?
So it's true, yeah. Next year we're celebrating our 100 years anniversary, and the company is currently owned in the 4th generation, and me, I'm representing the 5th generation, taking over next year with the big anniversary. I honestly don't think that 100 years ago you could have envisioned this size and this automation and where basically timber construction in this country has come to. So to be realistic about it, I think up until 1991, when my father's generation took over, this was a rather small local sawmill and carpentry shop. They employed back in the day around about 10 people. For comparison, we're over 250 now. Ooh. So it grew quite a lot. And I think also the whole prefab process wasn't necessarily something that was part of the previous generation. However, they obviously worked with timber. They built roofs, for example. They did specialized constructions like churches, also farmhouses, barns, stuff like that. And I think what we have in common to this day is this love for the material, the aim for quality, and just delivering a really great product.
So absolutely, the quality of your product and the performance of the finally assembled buildings is one of the most important factors of your business. Y'all are proud of that. Y'all assist designers in the process of making these highly efficient buildings. And y'all make sure that during the production as well, like everything is so well thought out. When you were explaining it and you gave us a factory tour, it seemed like you had thought of every aspect of the business, where particular elements had to be placed in the factory, the distance between elements, how they were labeled, QR codes, everything is optimized so well. Is this like a continual research and development that goes on at your company, trying to figure out the absolute best optimization of the assembly line?
Oh, absolutely. I think it has two parts to it, right? On one hand, you have incremental like processes that you just try to get better every day. And we work very hard. I mean, to give you an example, we're spending 4 full days a year. We shut down everything, like the factory, but also all the offices. And we have the entire staff just working on processes, making their own life, their own work a little bit better, a little bit more efficient. So that's one thing. And that's just a continuous process. And then on the other hand, of course, it involves some more radical innovations every few years when you build a new factory, when you put up a new production line or put in new automated machinery. So that goes hand in hand, basically. I think what is very important to understand here is that prefabricated timber construction doesn't just start in the factory, right? I mean, in order for us to know what we're even going to produce, we need like very detailed plans. Today, this is usually a 3D model that has all the information about the building that we're going to produce, all the way down to where is your power plug going to be, where is your light outlet going to be. And with all this information in the model, we generate CAD data that goes straight to the machines, and therefore just makes the whole process very, very efficient and also very detail oriented, because we can. And since we can, we kind of have to follow through, because if we miss out on a certain hole, on a certain cut in the material, of course, it's going to cause problems either in the production line or then latest while we assemble the building.
Absolutely. So you kind of started with the entire process. Let's continue on that. So in the beginning, you all assist designers in figuring out how to design a building with the modular construction in mind, because it's a very, very different mindset. If designing a building thinking that it's going to be constructed on site versus off site. Do you all have a particular specialized software that you all provide to designers, engineers, architects to help them figure out how to modularize a building?
That's a very good question. We do not in Switzerland, because our clients and the product or the buildings that we produce, there are always individual buildings, always customized. This is what the market here demands, and this is the segment that we're in. So we do not have a, let's say, configurator that helps you make that planning process very easily. However, I really like the word assist, because that's essentially what we do. So if, let's say, you're an architect and you come up with an idea, we try to kind of break through the traditional phase that the architect does all the work, they tender out, you get price feedback, and you choose one company. And once you have the company, they start replanning everything, because obviously it doesn't necessarily match what you have envisioned to what can be produced. So we're trying to be way more efficient by getting into the projects a lot earlier. That means while you're in the design phase as an architect, you can come to us, and we will give you the timber know-how, the prefab know-how, and assist you on the way. We give you tips how to do things better, how to solve certain issues, and we will also give you feedback right away. What works, what doesn't work, what costs more, what costs less, what's complicated, and so on. So that's really a process that is super beneficial, because on one hand, the designers, the architects, they also learn about that method of construction. So if they have a follow-up project with another client, they have also developed already, and there's quite a likely chance that they might want to work with us again, because they have seen the entire process and they see the benefit.
That's such a good experience with y'all. They never want to go back to on-site construction.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit different. I mean, what we do not necessarily have in Switzerland at all is the traditional stick frame. So that's not what we're competing with. But of course, we're competing with the general concrete and brick and mortar construction. The process is a lot different. To give you an example, just yesterday, I had the pleasure to visiting one of our sites. And it was a multi-story building. I think it was the first 18 or 12 out of 50-something apartments that we're building. And so they're all the way up in the 4th floor right now. And you walk through the building And I mean, it's clean. There is no waste. There is no. I honestly thought yesterday when I saw it, I think they went through with a vacuum clean. That's how clean it looked. There is no waste. There is no excess material. Everything is just on point. And I think that impression, that reference, I mean, it's fantastic for the designers that see the process, but also for the client, for the owner of those buildings.
That's very different than construction sites here in the States. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but I've seen several sites here littered with beer cans, trash, scrap, scrap wood everywhere. And you can eliminate some of that when walls and all that are made in a factory. But you said that there are two main advantages to assisting designers in the process. I guess the second advantage is that if they develop their 3D model to a very high degree of detail, that decreases the amount of work that y'all have to do when they pass off the model to y'all.
That's correct. To be honest, there is still a lot of improvement in that process. We're working on it, especially with just building information modeling as a process, as we see it, is something that we develop together, also with certain designers, with certain architects. And what we see is that a lot of people are gathering a lot of knowledge in this field. But I think what's important is to kind of link the disciplines and get to the point where eventually the process is a seamless process. I think in an ideal world, you design something as an architect and we generate the machine data right out of that specific model that you have already created. To be honest, we're not quite there yet, but it's a long process, but we're on the way, and we've made a lot of big improvements already. And we're really getting to the point where we see not just additional work, because the method is a bit more complicated, but we see the benefit. Imagine, for example, as a designer, eventually you get feedback from your municipality, from the building code, or the client just changes something. Let's assume you change around some windows. Now, in a traditional way, you would draw new plans, you would hand them to the construction company, you get new estimates, you get new schedules, etc., etc. Now, with the model, you move a window, you change the size, and it's seamlessly going through. We'll have a new price, a new schedule, and there's absolutely no delays.
As opposed to what people are currently doing right now. Yeah.
I think so, but I mean, you have to see it's also somewhat a shift in mindset. Like you as a client and also you as an architect, you have to be willing to make certain decisions earlier than what you're used to. It doesn't mean you have to make more decisions. As in a traditional stick built or concrete house, eventually you will have to decide where your kitchen is going to be, where your bathroom is going to be, but also where is your water outlet, where is your power outlet, etc. But instead of choosing it in the end, once you're in the room, you're doing it a lot earlier. And then, especially is helpful if we have a 3D model, you put on your VR goggles, you walk through your virtual house, you get to see the exact same thing that you would see on a building site, just a lot earlier. Therefore, you can make good decisions.
I bet your company was a lot different in the 90s when your father was thinking about this new forward way of thinking, because we didn't have technology like this back then. We didn't have VR, AR, or even BIM was at its very, very, very early stages, if at all. Everyone is still modeling in 2D. So y'all were ahead of the game by years. If y'all could imagine making these prefab panels out of 2D drawings.
Yeah, I think it was born out of necessity, basically. When that generation took over, there weren't so many timber buildings in Switzerland. It used to have a long tradition, like, in the 1900s, but then the skill was kind of forgotten over the years. And by that time, the code has changed over the years. And in the beginning of the 19s, all you could do in prefab timber was basically doing single family detached houses, an old barn here and there, or a roof on certain buildings. That was it. But what they saw back in the day was the potential of doing offsite construction. And then they looked around in the market and we saw, okay, panelization was the method used back then. So we made a big investment in 1995 and built the big prefab factory in Switzerland. At the time, it was primarily aimed also at the single family house market because that was kind of all that you were allowed to build. Okay. And what we have done different at that time is very early, before the whole CO2 and climate change debate was so popular, we focused very early on this niche to create green buildings, to create energy efficient buildings. And that was how we were able to set ourselves apart from the traditional methods of construction, because that just simply wasn't the topic there.
Yeah.
So
when
we built
you
a
say
lot
traditional, the traditional methods would be the CMU and steel and all that. That's what's traditionally used in Switzerland.
Yeah. Exactly.
So in the States here, whenever I talk about the advantages of timber construction, I always get this big, loud, very almost like visceral backlash, because everyone thinks timber construction equals deforestation. And is there a similar thing that you have to deal with in Switzerland, or your people over there understand what sustainably harvested wood is, and you are open about the sustainable forest management practices that you all engage in?
Absolutely. I think there's a better understanding here. I mean, Switzerland is a really small country, but we have a lot of forests. However, the forests are usually located in the mountains, so it's very hard to harvest there in the first place. However, that logic that if you cut down a tree, you need to plant a new one to make that whole process sustainable, I think it's rather deeply rooted. I think I've never really had that conversation here. People do understand it, and what we do as a firm, I mean, obviously we're only using certified wood, whether that is FSC or PEFC. Like, there are certain labels that basically guarantee that whatever is harvested is also planted once again.
And all
so
the
it's
wood
not
that
really
you sorry, all the wood that you source is local, right? It's from Switzerland.
No, that's not entirely true. I mean, we do have Swiss wood as well, but I think what we have to take into consideration here, we do have, I would say, better harvestable forests in Austria and in Germany. It's still in the region of the Alps, so rather close to Switzerland, in south of Germany, for example, where a lot of forest grows on rather even or flat surfaces, so it's easier to harvest. So we get a lot of wood sourced from there, but the main driver for this is not that we don't have the wood here in Switzerland or we wouldn't want to use it, but rather that we use a lot of engineered wood. That means instead of just cutting out the 2x4 out of a tree and using it as a stick frame, our buildings, especially when we go into multi-story buildings, we need to have engineered wood, glue lamps, for example, or CLT, for example. And in Switzerland, unfortunately, over the years, there isn't really that many glue lamp factories left, and especially not some that do mass productions of regular beams, for example. They do a lot of special construction. If you have really, really wide beams, really high beams, you can still get it sourced in Switzerland. But what happens oftentimes, you would take a Swiss tree, it goes to a big plant in Germany to get engineered, and then it comes back to Switzerland. So that's unfortunately the reason that this country here doesn't have that industry, the glue industry, and also the sawmills here, to be honest. I mean, we do have some left, but most of them are specialized in, let's say, window frames, for to give you one example, or facade materials. And they just simply don't have the capacity to attend to those big clients as we are, and provide the resources in a meaningful time frame.
So is Rengli's eventual hope and plan to scale up to such a high degree that y'all can assist in the development of engineered wood facilities in Switzerland, so you don't have to use facilities in Germany?
It's not a strategic priority that we have. And the reason being that those factories, to be efficient and to really, dig in economies of scale, you need such large volumes that we're not talking, double our production, but have it 10, 20-fold bigger. So we don't really see it as our responsibility, and also not as our core competence to really, start gluing or start sawing or eventually start planting the trees here in Switzerland. We have a very strong focus, on the factory, on panelization, on the engineering of the entire process, and that's where our core competence lies. And we rather want to, put our strength on that. And of course, we have a lot of partners. There is some very interesting projects in this regard here in Switzerland. We hope, we really do, that one of them will be successful, so that we would open up another supply channel.
Oh, that's exciting. So in addition to sustainably harvested wood, one of the key factors that pop up in your, on your website is the energy efficiency. And I kind of touched on this earlier in our conversation. So when I visited your factory, Minergy, the Minergy standard was something new to me. I hadn't heard of that before. And that is equivalent to, I guess, the passive house standard in the States. But what was shocking to me was that Minergy's high performance homes, that's like the baseline for construction in the country. Is that right?
It's almost right. It used to be better than the building code. But the building code has adapted and changed, and it got a lot more restrictive. And therefore, to Minergie, for themselves to set themselves apart, they were also getting stricter and stricter. The rules became harder to achieve.
I'm sorry, it's
In
Minergie,
general,
not Minergy. I screwed.
it's same thing. I don't know how you would even pronounce it, or how they would pronounce it in English. However, in general, it's a Swiss building label. It's a quality label, and they do have different standards. Like, I mean, if you're talking LEED, for example, as you have gold, platinum, and whatnot, this kind of same thing applies for Minergie. In general, what they do is that they're really focusing on a few things, like they want you to have well-insulated home. They want you to reduce the heat demand per square meter that you use per year to kind of keep your house in a livable condition. It always involves a controlled air ventilation system, because also an airtight building envelope is one of the priorities that they focus on. So in order for you to have clean, good air inside, you need that automated system in order not to run out of oxygen, basically. Furthermore, there is some rules like no fossil fuels for heating allowed. And then there is also some special Minergie Eco standard, for example, where you would focus a little bit more on other dimensions. You want to have healthy materials. You want to have enough daylight in your house, soundproofing, sustainability of materials, gray energy in the whole process. So, there's a lot of dimensions that they look at, and depending on which Minergie label that you're going to get, the rules are a little bit different.
So how does that affect your business? Do you have to constantly be aware of what materials you are keeping in stock, what materials you can use that follow this Minergie code?
Well, absolutely, because, I mean, let me be clear, Minergie is not a necessity here in Switzerland. It's something that you choose that is a bit stricter than the regular code. And as we attend to all kind of clients' needs, it can be that one project that we do is a Minergie certified, or is Minergie P, which is kind of passive standard. The next one might be a client that wants a certificate from LEED, or from, there's many labels in the market. So depending on your client, you have to be able to react to all the requirements. And it means in certain times, you have to exchange a certain material, or be very aware that you don't use certain types of glues, some maximum amounts of a certain material that is only allowed in a building, and so on and so on. So there's like from my own experience, sometimes almost a bit of a jungle, depending on the label. And we have to take into consideration that some labels, they go even further. Like when we're talking LEED, for example, you have the whole ESG dimension. So you're not just talking about the building itself, but where is it located? How does it attend to different tenants, et cetera, et cetera? So you have to take a lot more into consideration, and your team has to be ready to adapt to that and adapt the processes to fit all the criteria. So at the end of the day, you get your label right.
So that's such tricky business for you all to be into, because you'll have to keep up with the software, you'll have to keep up with all the hardware in your facility, the automated saws, these tilting tables, the robot arms, if y'all have those, the CNC machines. Y'all are a software hardware company. Y'all are also advisors to the architects. Y'all are also dealing with the clients out on job sites and assisting them with how to assemble all these panels together. That's a lot to juggle.
Well, it is indeed, and there's a lot of different fields. And I mean, we have to be aware that it's so many skill sets that you need that it's simply just not doable if you're too small of a firm. You need so many different skill sets, so many different educations and degrees to really be an expert in your respective field. And I think that's one of the drivers why now we have 250 trained professionals with us, and we're still growing in order to just attend to all these different needs that we have to be aware of.
And it's not easy to build a company like what you and your father and grandfather and all that have built. It's just it's hard work. It's a lot of investment, that continual investment, time and money that goes into maintaining such a complex prefab modular business. Like the machines that you have in your factory, do you have to constantly turn them around and look for the next CNC router that's better? Or do you even have like technicians that are part of Renggli that can like switch out bits to the next bit that's out there, or even like tweak these robot arms or something to make them better?
It's a good question. It's a bit hard to answer. I mean, we do all of the above mentioned, right? So I mean, of course, we do have an in-house team, in whether that's on the software front or whether that's on the hardware front. And sometimes it's little tweaks and tricks. You find out while you're producing something. What we oftentimes see is actually not just, we move to the next generation of machines. That's kind of obvious every once in a while. It's a rather long-term process, but because I mean, also lead times, right? When you order a new CNC machine today, you have somewhat between 18 and then probably 36 months of lead time before you could even get it. But I think what's more important is that we try to adjust. I told you before, we have very individual projects. So that also means what goes through the factory or what comes out of the factory is very different from day to day.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do to increase efficiency within a certain project. So let's say I have a double-sided panel that is closed and it has, 12 layers in a specific project. And that might be more than I would usually have. So then we also optimize the process itself. Not so much the machines, but the process, like where do I store which material, which step will give us an increased efficiency in order to just really seamlessly integrate and learn throughout a certain project.
So you talked like this when we were visiting the factory too. You like analyzed every part of your business and almost made it like an Amazon facility where they have figured out where certain items need to be, which factory needs to stock which items. You have really dived into the nitty-gritty of how your business runs, and it's very impressive. Like everyone I talk to who is looking at the construction industry, like outsiders, they all say, why can't it be automated like the automotive industry or like the aviation industry? They have figured out how to automate all this stuff. Why has the construction industry not? And y'all have made significant steps towards automating it.
I think the difference, I mean, yes, we do. We also look at, I mean, with envy, we look at a automotive manufacturing plant. And I mean, it's phenomenal what these people are doing. And we wish our facility was as automated. But I believe the difference is, if you produce, let's say, 100,000 doors for your, whether that's your Tesla, whether that's your BMW or whatnot, but you do have so big numbers that it really makes sense to automate all these processes, to program a robot to put in that specific door in that specific model in a very specific way. However, for us, when we design and produce a building, we do and will have all individual parts.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that not a single panel is the same as the other one in an entire project. So it's a lot harder to automate this because you cannot just simply program a very certain step very efficiently, but you basically would have to program the robots every single time, unless you eventually get into more parametric way of thinking. And the robots and the new generations, they allow us to do that as well. So I think it's a step-by-step process. I really hope that within my generation, we'll make some significant improvements and also really get the benefits of automation and robotization in the factory.
I completely agree with you. I hope we can start thinking about buildings at like a set of SKUs where you use certain panels that are the same size, but your eventual outcome can be creative. There's no reason why it cannot, but the building blocks that you start with can be from like a list, that you use. That's the hope. But how do you maintain your competitive advantage in an industry that is so creative and wants this, like, their fingerprint on every single building? They want every building to be slightly different because you are maintaining these really expensive machines, but your process is also highly individualized. It's not standard. How are your buildings cost competitive with on-site construction or other construction in Switzerland?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have to be. I mean, not only within our respective sector of panelized timber prefab. I mean, we have a lot of really great firms in Switzerland, as you have seen. A lot of other people are also doing a phenomenal job. So therefore, yeah, you really have to stay ahead of the curve. How do you do it? I think one of the main reasons is, like, you really need to care. I think that's where it starts. And I think it starts with culture, right? Like, if you build a company culture where all your contributors are really focused on a certain vision, they really want to achieve greatness and they want to get better every single day. That's a mindset and the spirit that you have in the firm that will allow you to grow, to stay competitive, to have creative ideas, to test out new things, and so on. I think that's a very big part. Second, of course, we do have to be cost competitive, especially also compared to regular methods of construction, because our clients at the end of the day, I'd say definitely not all of them are just convinced necessarily by timber or by the CO2 reduction. We do, with the bigger multi-story buildings, have a lot of institutional investors as clients, and there, the return on investment is just playing a big part. And unfortunately, the way we look at buildings and return on investments in a DCF method, as it's traditionally done, we don't necessarily look so much at the cost of using it over time, but we focus on the cost of building it on day one.
Cost, yep.
Exactly. And I mean, if that's a comparison point, well, we have no other chance but to match it or try to match it. And if eventually, like, if you compare the same materials, the same quality in prefab timber and regular construction, I think we are absolutely cost competitive. What we can do on top of that, though, is that I believe we can build a lot faster. We can build a lot higher quality and a lot more standardized quality. We are not impacted by winter, by snow, by rain, and whatnot. And last but not least, if we have returning customers, you've learned so much in the process that we will just become more and more efficient. So that's also on top of that. And I mean, at the end of the day, with our clients, if your building is up half a year earlier, you will sell or rent it half a year earlier. And that's also a big advantage.
That's very true. The time that it takes to construct it could be, even if it's the upfront cost is a little bit more, that time could make up for that slight increase in cost.
And you know what we see in today's world with all this like instability, with volatility in prices for building materials and whatnot. I think one of the big advantages here is, since we do have our, three-dimensional twin, our digital twin, before we even go into the building project itself, it means we really know the amount of materials that are in there, the cost of those respective materials. And since we do know very early, we can also make orders early, for example. We can guarantee a certain price very early in the project, whereas in traditional methods, you figure out that you missed something, you need to order again, you might have delays and whatnot. So that all plays a big role. I mean, this certainty of your costs and of your schedule, that's also worth something to many of our clients very early in the project.
That's very true. So where do you see Renggli going? I mean, your position to take over the fifth generation, taking over this incredible company. What are your future goals for Renggli International?
Well, I think for the group, especially for the Renggli Group here in Switzerland, we've been based here for 100 years. We've developed all over the country. We've built subsidiaries in the different regions, and in Switzerland that means different languages. So, for example, we do have a team of more than 20 contributors now in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. We do have a whole office in the Italian-speaking part and whatnot. So we've basically grown here and really tried to cover the entire region here.
And do you all, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the factories in the French-speaking part, do you all even work on projects in France or in Italy, in Germany?
No, not yet. I mean, what we're doing, just to be clear here, we're producing everything out of one factory so far, the one that
Okay.
we visited in central Switzerland. Those offices are primarily, the engineers, the project
Ah,
managers and whatnot that deal with the project in their own respective language.
got it.
However, in recent years, we've been looking over the border. We've done a lot of analysis and figured out where is the next step going to lead us. We've gathered some experience. The last, I'd say, 4 to 5 years, we've been active building buildings in Germany. So we crossed the border there. Also, mostly supplied out of our Swiss factory. And as we can see in the media now, we have recently decided that we're going to make an investment in Germany, close to Berlin, to build up a new production facility and really, be fit for that respective market, and also grow a local team that can really adapt to the slightly different market conditions that we have here in Switzerland. So that's
That's
certainly the
very
next big step.
exciting.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great.
Is
And
it
I
going to
mean, as
be
a
a
little,
similar sized facility to the one that you already have in Switzerland, or
and
large?
it's a bit bigger. It's a bit larger. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we see a lot of demand, and it's also slightly different aim. Like in Switzerland, we have these highly individualized panels that we produce, and as we have discussed already, I mean, also we believe in a certain standardization that we could be even more efficient and get our throughput lifted by a double-digit number if the whole product is a bit more standardized.
Yeah.
And I think that we believe that the German market is more ready for those type of developments. They do have bigger parcels, or rather, how do you say? Bigger areas that they get to develop. So
Okay.
therefore, they can, be a bit more flexible to come up with something a bit more standardized. Like, from the technical aspect, it doesn't have to
Because acquiring land is
look
extremely
like it.
difficult in Switzerland. So they are
Exactly.
limited with what they can build, as opposed to in Germany, where they might have a little more freedom.
Exactly, that's the point. And I think here our land that you can buy is usually super small, so you really have to make the most out of it, and you have to be individual in order to
Yeah.
make it worth it, basically. And in Germany, yeah, as we said, we're also having slightly different aim. We're going more into volumetric construction. So we want to kind of, bring prefab to the next level. And instead of just doing wall panels and floor panels, we want to develop entire rooms, including the interior fit out that are then transported to site and assembled even quicker to a higher degree of standardization. And yeah, I'm happy to let you know by the time this comes out, it will be official. So we're also launching a new brand. It's called Timpla. On timpla.eu, you will find us. We're going live with production in the beginning of 2024. So still some time. Just started with the building of the factory, and we're super excited. I think with a great team and great partners that are local, we're building this new facility, and yeah, we're super excited for the next steps.
So Timpla is going to be the name of this new facility in Germany.
Exactly, it's like it's its own company based in Berlin, and they will basically
Right.
attend to the market using the Timpla brand. Yeah.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
I hope to visit your facility by the time it's up and running in 2024.
You're very welcome. I mean, we'll gladly have you again, and then show you some new tricks, and maybe some new machines and some new processes. And yeah, I think it's exciting. Also to start something new and really, back it on the shoulders that we already have, on the experience, the know-how that we have, but
And
also
all the
be
data that you've
open-minded.
gathered. I mean, you've gathered
Absolutely.
basically 20 years or more of data on how to optimize this process, how the Swiss industry works. Now you can use that data and modify it in Germany, and then eventually in other countries too. And come over to the States as well, because we really need a facility like yours over here.
Yeah, it's a bit far, like a few years ago, we've actually looked into it. I mean, we've also visited a lot of suppliers, we've visited a lot of producers over there, but we decided to do it step by step. I think that's maybe what's a bit different when you're a family-owned company and have more of a generational outlook. You also, we don't need to scale.
Yeah.
Like we want to scale to a certain extent when we see great opportunities, but we don't have quarterly shareholder meetings where they push us to do so we can have really long-term outlook on things. and also grow more organically, and get the team ready for the next step as well. I think that's very important. I said it before. I mean, the culture is one thing, and to kind of keep that up and keep the spirit in the firm, it's important to have innovation, but you also want to be sustainable in that way, that like sustainable and reliable in a way. So yeah,
And
step by step. But
that's what's different about your company. Like, I've seen startups here with noble ambitions to disrupt the construction industry, but they have, when I talk to them, I feel like they have short-term goals. Being a family-owned company and having not the burden, but this extra added responsibility of holding up the family name. And you are, like you said, everyone under you, all your employees and all, y'all are all a family. It's not just the Renggli family, it's all the employees too. You're a one big family unit. So you'll have to take a little more calculated decisions, a little smarter growth stages, rather than just rapid, irresponsible growth almost.
You know whether this is smarter or not, I'm not actually sure, because I think the ambitions of those startups that really want to disrupt the whole industry, I think it's fantastic. And I think in general, they have also showed us to a certain extent what can be or what could be possible if you succeed. However, as with all things, I mean, if you just load up a huge plate and you have all these different business models that you want to integrate at one specific point in time, I think it gets extremely difficult. And we have to be aware of that. I mean, at the end of the day, it is construction. It is not rocket science, but it's also not like you're just developing one product and once you're done with it, you produce your X 100 million of iPhones. It is just a little bit more nitty gritty, and you will have different customers, you will have different architects, different planners, different municipalities, different rules in states and countries and so on. And I think you have to take all of that into consideration while you scale up to just keep it under control, basically.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David, for sharing all that knowledge with us. And I hope to visit your facility again, and even the new one in Germany. There is so much we can learn from the way y'all are doing things. And I hope a lot of people are watching this podcast and listening to you, because it's going to help the entire industry as a whole.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being online with you, and I'm glad to have you again in Eberswalde in Berlin once the factory is up. And I'm really looking forward to what's happening in the industry. So keep in touch, and until next time.
Thank you, David.